I'm deeply concerned about the lack of culture in the listeners through the performers. The true appreciation of music subtlety in an interpretation, stylistic choices, quality of legato, meaning of arched phrasing, inner voices brought out creatively, perhaps intuitively, regardless if it's planned. In other words, values which are essential to the expression of our art, which I teach, which I believe in, are not shared by the large community of music lovers who, from competitions to festivals to media presentations of artists at different places where they are demonstrated very superficially, either for large crowds under the idea that classical music is too elitist and therefore has to be shared with more, or even in more intimate settings, which is acoustically what is usually expected for the introspection of the shared moment with the listener, is superficial. The legato is not made with the finger but with a pedal on the piano, and it seems to pass through as if it is okay because perhaps we don't know better, or we don't want to know, to expect better. Better is not necessarily better, but differently approached with care, attention, craftsmanship, a sense of service of the piece played, of the meaning of the style and the context of the piece. In other words, a little bit of approach of a whole life in each note of experience and understanding of what this is about. It's not about teaching grammar to people who already speak. It's not about being pedagogical in the artistic performance, because that would be redundant or perhaps boring. But I think to incorporate both with creative curiosity, with conviction, is stimulating for the audiences. Of course, if everybody is analphabetized, you need somebody to read them the text. And the way you express it then influences the way they understand it. Just the way a filmmaker's editor can ruin or enhance a picture that becomes more perhaps interesting to watch because the editing of it is made in a rhythmic way that brings so much more. In other words, we need to be more educated through, if not school, when there is none, or music is considered for non-musicians as just an entertainment background filler for numbing the capacity to self introspect, because it is essential to find in the classical music, as they call it for those who are not into it. Of course, it's so much more than that, but let's say the approach of it should remain as impulsive as thoughtful. And therefore, just like watching sports, when you don't know the rules, you think, oh wow, they jump, they run, they catch, what's wrong? And realizing that after a jump they have to land a certain way unless the commentator explains it to you, then as a listener, the watcher of the sport, you start becoming knowledgeable. And therefore the style matters as much as the aspect of the way of making it. Naturally, when in architecture of today or in sports of today, what matters is that the style is the reflection of the utility and not necessarily the style as an aesthetic by itself. And so one can wonder if, to a certain extent, one should, because we translate music from distant times on instruments they were not conceived for, but for listeners who are no more educated to receive it. In other words, analphabetized musicians listen to onomatopoeias, sounds. Just like when you listen a love poem in a foreign language, you hear the sounds but not the meaning of the phonemes. How you know it's not an insult? You don't. You only listen to the sounds for the sounds. And if you think that the performer seems to look having a good time, then you think, wow, it's good guy or good gal. And okay, that is a very basic approach which brings classical music to the audience that is not aware of it. But everybody learns through their life by acquired taste what is quality food, what is quality fabric, what is quality time, what is quality people, what is quality humor. And okay, subjective, of course. There is no one rule that defines it for everybody, thankfully. But there are situations where I am puzzled when I hear people so ecstatic from the professional world of organizers, managers, critics, people who are in the business of classical music, promoting this or this artist, this or that work as a produce in the supermarket at the very superficial level. And perhaps it's because they don't know better or because they consider it, which I fear is worse, condescendingly, that the audience doesn't need to know better. I think that if you treat your audience with respect, as you treat your art with respect, in other words, your approach to honest craftsmanship in service of the muse, then even uninformed people who listen to you, I think they catch the idea through your art making that you're deeply involved with the conviction and that you put all your life experience in each of these notes or lines or phrases. Just like an actor in a monologue, just like an actor who pretends to be a character and you're in rupture of disbelief because you want to be told a story, and the narration transcends the fact that it's acted, therefore it's pretended in order to tell you the story, which then has implications in your understanding individually of how much it impacts you as a watcher of a film or a theater play, even if it's translated, even if it's subtitled, even if it's not a language barrier. There is always the barrier of the understanding the meaning of the words, the choice of the words, the choice of the rests between the words. The emotion or the manipulation of the way is told according to what it's supposed to be in the text. Of course, the written text has no rhythm indication, so you have to find out how you'll deliver it when you're an actor. And the directors take care of that for you. So you could become a puppet of a director. And you can be a puppet of a teacher. You can be a puppet of a famous performer who you want to say, I'm going to try to play like because this performer is so successful, I'll just imitate. Or then the opposite is also very disturbing. If you pretend, if not perhaps by conviction even, to be just provocative for the sake of it and do things in the way that is purposely not how people expect to hear it, unless there is a deep conviction in the approach for which you do, it remains just provocative. So therefore, why is it discouraging? Is because I can say when I hear some people play, but they could bring out this voicing or another voicing. They could bring out a legato with shape and an arch, which involves managing the weight of the fingers differently on the keys than just aligning independent notes with pedal for the right foot legato and the dynamic range with the left foot pedal softness. I know it sounds incredibly, immediately as said, I hear myself appear to be arrogant or perhaps condescendent, saying, do you know how difficult it is to do? Who are you to know better? That is the devil's advocate in me. And I'm honest about it. I question myself every day, as all artists do, I guess. Perhaps some more than others, but regardless, it's to do with their own consciousness. And as a teacher, I am building, constructing, elevating the attention towards the beauty, the meaning, the quality of the phrasing, the touch, the sound, the meaning of the line. In other words, to put yourself on the line in what you do, in order to, not because everybody else has done it before and you can imitate it by ear, or because you're motivated by the success that you can obtain. Perhaps that is a very necessary also motivation. I don't mind. I think any motivation is good. But ultimately respecting by trying to play a finger legato, meaning connected fingers, and play and not, you don't have to always drop the finger down to play the note. You can touch it and then go inside the key. If it's mezzo pianissimo, then if it's mezzo piano, then mezzo forte, and then forte. And it depends if it's Haydn forte or Schumann forte. So in other words, you bring in culture in what you do by being discerning, just like you do with literature, food, entertainment. Oh, I don't like this, I prefer that, which is right. This actor, this film director, no, I'm not in the mood to watch this today. And I think that we then have an, of course, acquired taste through literature, through anything that brings us to be curious enough to love it so that we can explore it. Would it be the subtleties of a sports gesture, or the subtlety of a acting of an actor? Would it be the subtlety of the cook who managed to prepare the food in a certain way that you try to either imitate when you cook, either to think about how to organize the taste buds of the palate? So in other words, you evolve in your tastes. And I think as a teacher, of course, I hear students who come in with drive, with ear, with musicianship, with whatever level of grammar, of knowledge of music, regardless, they have fingers and technique to play in order to be accepted in a school. And then what after? What is the next step? Bring them not to do what they don't want, rather make them explore what they thought they can't or they shouldn't. Because there is one word that comes to mind is effective, clean, reliable, and therefore subtlety in the expression of the pianism with different keyboards and actions that can surprise you negatively, that you manage not to always control, compared to others who might be able to control them better in competitions or even in class, brings you to short-term decision to make it up, instead of taking the time to develop the digging within oneself to create your own, with the help of a teacher that you can distrust, perhaps trust, perhaps reject, perhaps partially reject or partially keep what you receive. you keep what you wish. Life will wash out all what is going on in the daily life through the months and the years. And then you will be transmitting yourself to students these values for which you think it's meaningful to be teaching. And these values for which you think is meaningful to be performing when you play. When Chopin sings on the piano like a bel canto aria of Bellini, for instance, for his time, when that was the canon of beauty of the melodic line singing, he had repeated notes. And there were change of syllables in the text when they were sung. But when it's played on a keyboard instrument with keys, if you lift and replay, you hear ta-ta, a consonant and vowel twice in a row. But if you, as I just did, lift it halfway up and you replay it before, you hear ta-da, and that's without pedal. So you could wonder who will hear the difference in the amount of notes that are played, in the acoustics, the resonance, and the effect and the tempo, and basically the allure of the piece. Possibly. Also, I think that if you can incorporate expression, subtlety, for instance, choose to make voicing, it can be always the melody, not necessarily. And when you do the middle section of 118.2 by Brahms, very often you bring out something because it's more or less indicated in the stems up and down of the score. Not necessarily always, but regardless, the question is, do you follow it until where? Even if by the text itself, when you play it, there is not all that. In other words, it's there, but is not meant to be brought out. And I find that piano as an instrument is an instrument that can convey so many things. It can convey organ on the piano, choir on the piano. It can convey the piano music written for the piano, and not necessarily the keyboard music imitating other genres, sung or danced or sacred or any kind, but its own, like a fugue, a sonata, an organization of a form, which is a thought process that it by itself is not the conviction, but it's what you inject in it. Even if you add expression and meaning to it outside of the form, like Chopin adding a funeral march in a sonata that by essence, in Haydn's opinion, was just for string quartets, symphonies, or trios, a form in which he organized the GPS of the development of the thought between two opposite themes, development recap. And therefore, what you put in the substance of this form can break the form, go beyond the form, or enhance the form, or make the form develop through time, or even in one's own time. In other words, the contents and the form in which it is placed are not defining by itself. And of course, if you play a scherzo, which means joke, by Chopin, it's tragic. So you have to already understand the meaning, the title, and the approach of Chopin about it. Or what is a carnival by Schumann, who's not just a fair in which you enter in this kind of Luna Park, go through attractions and say, I'm going to be mesmerized by it. Yes, that's on the surface. What about the masks? What about the option to understand how you reveal things under the surface? Of course, you can watch an art painting by yourself and just look at what you see, or you can have a art critic next to you and all of a sudden reveal to you the symbolisms of this or that, color, choice, form, character presented. And I don't know, perhaps ultimately this acquired taste makes you like more or less that painting or similar paintings. Same thing about how many Beethoven sonatas you know, how many Bach cantatas you know, how many Haydn symphonies you have heard, how many Brahms symphonies you have heard. In other words, when I say heard, it doesn't mean just listen in the background. That you had followed with a score as you read different literature. You read Japanese haiku poems, or you read War and Peace in Russian, if you can learn the language, or a translation that you trust. And all of a sudden you go from the, of course, minimal to the maximal. You go from something that is few words that concentrate so many thoughts poetically, like a haiku, into a very long novel like Marcel Proust's novels. And there are different acquired tastes for all of that. This is what makes us, I guess, cultivated, but remaining at the same time intuitively inspired, because you don't convince an audience with cultivation. You don't bring the bar lines to the listener as if you translate the score visually into sounds. The notation is whatever it is in music, more or less precise, I think less than more, but nevertheless enough to convey something that you've never heard of people who were never recorded how they played it, and that you end up becoming as if it is in your present life, as if it's part of your inner world. These acquired tastes, in plural, become part of your musical life. And you discover Albeni's expression, as well as Schoenberg expression, as well as Stravinsky's expression. They don't cancel each other. They don't confuse you either, because some seem to be more atonal, some seem to be more modal, some seem to be whatever language they use in their vocabulary to convey what they want to express. And if you're puzzled by what they express or how much they express it, or you listen to a Scriabin piece and you have no clue what to follow because so much is going on at the same time, or Mettner too, compared to a Rachmaninoff or Chopin, where even if there are very rich inner voicings, you mostly hear the performers bring you the melodic line, which is the unforgettable perfume of music, regardless of the harmonic richness or contrapuntal polyphonic texture, which enhance all of that, perhaps overwhelm it in case of some composers. But it's, again, their choice, and you are there to either bring out in chamber music one line more than another so that you keep the balance, or as a soloist you make also a choice to shed light on some aspect of it in your reading that is then heard. A paradox to have a heard reading through the performance. But of course, if the listener doesn't know what to expect, then they're satisfied with anything. And the anything is not condescending, it's actually arrogant. Because you want to serve a work of art that was meaningful to the composer who wrote it, for the purpose for which it was meant, which might have changed through the centuries because of secular versus, let's say, sacred in all contexts. But regardless, there is the timelessness of the gestural meaning of a interval, of a rhythmic pattern, of a combination of a hemiola, and if you don't know how to call it, you feel it. But then if it's blurred in pedal, if it's all loud or soft, detached with pedal for legato or without pedal dry, you find that you're offered only lesser choices of a variety of subtle touches. From legatissimo over legato to legato connected to air legato to staccato, and in between the two, the portato or the tenuto, whichever we call it. People call differently the same things, or well, for some understandings of others, that's how misunderstandings happen. Call differently the things that others call differently, and then is a loss in translation. But regardless, when you give an example on the piano, then you try to explain what a rubato is. The essence of romantic music in Chopin, for instance, in the era of romantic era, is the longing, the escaped high notes, hope, and then the drop of the drop, diminished fourth, major third, diminished, minor second. So there is a gesture in all that, which is suggestive of a hope and a drop. Okay, that's on the surface. But in fact, if you delay slightly the high note, you inject a little bit, perhaps a nanogram of regret before the hope to reach the high note and then drop down. Now, you could also argue that it's only 6 notes and you don't need to, other than the playing them, you don't have to retell them through your psyche, perhaps belittling it or over enhancing it, in both ways, not letting it just speak what it is. So natural is important because that's what we come from and that's how we go away from in the path of life, au natural. But meanwhile, through the voyage of life, we shape things, from the clothes to the thinking to the respect to others and to believing in some things that we might even contradict ourselves if we disbelieve in them. In other words, through what the music expresses is not just a fulfillment of an excitement and possibly a filling up of the gap of silence in order to avoid thinking because it's frightening. And therefore, if the music is soul for the food, through the composer's imagination or emotion or sensibility, sensitivity, all combined, they have suffered and lived and hoped and organized and imagined, and they left us few signs on paper, and all of a sudden we bring them up to life our way, perhaps because our time period doesn't long for anything, because it's all about immediacy. The text messages, everything is instant. The food and the thought and the so how to translate the meaning of longing of the 19th century, which then in the longing develops a suspension in music or a poetic expectation in literature. And how do you place this in your playing with conviction, not just because you recite words that you don't know what's their meaning, since they don't connect to your way of today? Or then, if you really go that route, you could argue aesthetically that we should only play music of our own time and not trying to play in our own time so much music of their own time, in which we really don't belong to, intellectually, emotionally, culturally. Perhaps because today we have access to so much more information, which is wonderful compared to the past. We can search and study niche knowledge of things happened who knows when and for how long and where. And then because we get so driven by that research, we become, and that's wonderful, an acquired taste that is shared with others through knowledge. I mean, what is more liberating than knowledge for the critical minds of humans, so they can rethink the world for the better, for the good, through the contradictory conversations about what they think all this is. And that is much way healthier than wars and impositions of laws and rules. But to have some editions, some competitions in classical music with some stars which change every several years, being the spotlights of organizations that bring them to be the top of the crop, for the listener who doesn't know better, or perhaps doesn't have time to compare or to listen to others. Then we have Rubinstein in the 70s, and now we have Lang Lang, and then we'll have somebody else after. And what do they play? Chopin, Beethoven. And how was Beethoven and Chopin understood in their own time by themselves playing it? For the listeners who were all amateur musicians listening to it, because the others didn't even have access to culture. Thankfully today we do. But because we do, it doesn't mean that we should let in our individual drop by drop approach through a concert hall of 40 people, you play your conviction the way you would do it if you were having a mass broadcasted podcast or a concert in front of a stadium. It's very difficult to organize an intimate thought process with a crowd. Inevitably, the message is changed in the way it's projected. Chamber music is not symphonic. Opera is not an art song. They have their own ways of expressing what they convey through different dimensions of everything, from the performer's number to the listener's number, and from the attention of a staging compared to an acting or a dancing and a singing, all combined in opera, which in Italian means work, combined work, compared to a solo pianist evoking so many things in a sonata or a polyphony like a fugue, which is so-called pure music, but it vehicles the necessity of following voices, gestures, which could implement meaning in minor or major, even if it didn't for them, or for Bach, compared to what it means to us today, major and minor. And we follow the voices, or perhaps we stop following voices, and after 3 voices we hear chords, because that's what our hearing allows to combine only, when it too much goes on with 5th voice entering. And so, yes, all this spoken while played is distracting and disruptive. I was just demonstrating it because that's what one could think while playing it. But when you hear the inner voices and you try to bring them out in your playing, you try to find a tasteful way to do that. And the second theme of the first sonata by Beethoven is should be in relative major, A flat major, compared to the first theme in F minor. But he uses minor 6th with major 3rd. So it's Smile with a Tear, as I like to call it, or perhaps others do too. You can call it anything you want, but there is a nuance to that minor within the major. And how much do you want to bring it? Do you separate it? Then you can argue immediately within the subtlety of the expression that it's too much. It interrupts the flow. You're not supposed to bring out by its presence alone. It's already vehicles the idea of the minor within the major. So you don't have to enhance it by the phrasing or the dynamic or the diminuendo. And this is the controversy that can forever go on with oneself, being one's own devil's advocate. Do I play what I hear? Do I play what I believe? Do I play what I even perhaps misguessed or misunderstood in the tempo, phrasing, articulation? But I do it with conviction, even if I can choose, since after all, unlike a painting, it's not on the canvas forever. As soon as you finish playing, you restart, and it's like rebuilding the whole universe of it from scratch, with the unexpected, and the instrument, and the acoustic, and the emotion, and who listens to you. It's an interaction. It's not just a recitation of some kind of text, as sacred as we might think it is, or meaningful to us, or afraid that we'll be making a mistake, which means we didn't prepare, or we couldn't control, or not as well as the others. And then it's all about effectiveness compared to realization or self-realization. That's why as a teacher I enhance so much the importance of the accomplishment on the mid-short term time I'm given to work with the students before they go to their next step of their development after the preceding and they pass through here. And I give them the substance of all what I have received, and from my teachers and from my experience, and so do all teachers. The question is, what do you project in this transmission, and how much of it is picked by the students who are either able or unable intellectually or emotionally or perhaps technically to understand, implement, or even contradict. Perhaps it's a grain that is planted for a later harvest, which will happen inevitably when the young artists blossoms all their energies within their own realization of their art. And in the process, they will be bringing to their audiences the quality of their touch, the quality of their phrasing, the quality of their legato, the choice of their non-legato, the choice of the voicing or not, or how much, the expression of their acquired taste or perhaps lived experience of rubato. And it's so subtle because a hint is an exaggeration, but already the acceptance that you have to deliver it in a real time from beginning to end of the piece before you start again, and in performance with audience is one time through. And in that time through, the planned and the unplanned happen. And on the surface level, for the technique of the actuation of all the notes, of course, then the quality of the sound, the quality of the phrasing, the risk-taking, quote unquote, to play a finger legato compared to detached pedal legato, on the surface is justifiable. You can say, hey, I might do a very unforgettable legato diminuendo with slight rubato without pedal, but if I play with the pedal detached, I will be having this kind of cover insurance that things will still resonate well and clean. And because it's a subjective, obviously very subjective art, if somebody plays the opening of the slow movement of the E minor concerto by Chopin with imaginary lyrics or phrasing gesture for the sixth and then the fifth up compared to the step motions of the way down. Let's say you were afraid to have a note that plays louder than you expect or softer, and you go, oh, I didn't expect that, or and it doesn't speak because the key was too heavy, you didn't push it enough, or you didn't place yourself in position. So that's why I teach technique in order to prepare gestures that allow you to be reliable within the subtlety of the expression, because any mistake, or let's say note that didn't speak or the correct way or the correct note, is the produce of an ill-prepared gesture. And therefore we have to embed in the muscular memory through repetitive practicing the gestures that allow us to position ourselves in the place so that we can deliver it correctly, even on most unexpected situations. Since you don't play the piano, you play any piano as a pianist, compared to a violinist or a fluteist who plays their violin or their flute within the acoustic or here or there, which of course changes also, but at least the approach to the touch of the instrument is always the same. And so it can be said for a bicycle racer or a Formula One driver. They become one with their instrument in order to produce the, in this case, most of the time, speed that justifies the therefore the art form in which they're involved, to produce the best curve that reads you faster, and that could be on ski or any other thing. Of course, some sports like figure skating divides in the grades the subjective artistic from technical, being more supposedly objective, which probably is. But nevertheless, other than few sports where the artistic gets a separate rating from the technical, in the piano playing the two nourish each other. It's not just play clean and technical or play musical and messy. Obviously the two are self-excluding, and that's, they don't need a teacher then. I think the teacher is to bring through the technique the relative security that you can project and fight the decay by picking up the next note where the decay arrived, and then rise to the next note, which is the tension of the dominant. It can be the question or the answer, the dominant or the tonic, whichever way you want to call it for the grammar. You feel it. Well, you feel it. You sense that there is a build-up, and there is a sense of dissonance, this in case the tritone and the seventh. But that doesn't tell you how much to do it, or how little to do it, or how not enough ever of expressing. And then where do you place the grace note? Ekir, the editor of the New Polish National, says that the grace notes are on the beat in Chopin. You hear Rubinstein and others from before these editions, when it used to be, for instance, for Chopin, the revered editions were Paderewski and other pianists who edited, and people played the grace notes before the beat. And ultimately you will wonder as a listener, informed or not, what's the difference? For me, as long as the grace note in the first place, if the composer wrote it, is that it enhances by delaying the note that is adorning before it. And so if you put meaning in the embellishment of Chopin, and you bring this note in your way, slightly delayed, slightly louder, or not, how slightly, or just flat, by, again, devil's advocate saying, I don't need to bring it because the leap of the octave by itself, it's the expression. It's not all on the same note. Therefore, the melody is there, the rhythm is there, the accompaniment is there. All this micro climate that is created to feel some kind of well-being. And then comes the difficulty of the expression when a teacher, an artistic director in a recording label or something tells you, play it simple. So that's like the artists in theater having to say the line without overstating it. To be or not to be. To be or not to be. To be or not to be. So understating, overstating, delaying, not delaying. I believe that ultimately the beauty is in the conviction of the moment in which you involve your statement through somebody else's music. If it's an improvisation or a composition, I don't think if I do an interpretation, because I didn't write it down and I'm not teaching it to somebody else who would sit down and go, then the score must say in the published edition allegro or moderato or espressivo, crescendo, mezzo forte, mezzo piano, hairpin diminuendo, or pedal on the beat. So if I want to convey this through the paper only, okay, I have to put all these markings in case somebody plays. Because after all, Bach Prelude and Fugues have no indications of interpretation. Perhaps they're not meant to be character pieces. They were used, of course, at the time as exercises, but even so, they were imitative of styles in which you played them within the time period. So you played E major, book 1, and you phrased it as bowed by what you hear in the string players. And on the modern piano, which is made about playing evenly and longly without so early decay, you can make a very long flat legato. So perhaps then the aesthetic changes with the instrument, therefore the listener expectation. So perhaps then we love it by betraying it, but at the same time we bring it to our contemporaries with the means of today. And if we learn it on the harpsichord, then we have to play it with the subphrase articulation uneven, not together. As the harpsichordists call it, jeu inégal, or bleeding for the legato, when you overstay. And the fingerings without the thumb. And so, yes, then it's a museum approach of the day, and it's today in the museum, or then you decide that you make a 18th century Mozart opera staged in the imaginary 21st century situation, which is often done nowadays in theaters, where you want to suggest that besides the music and the text, the representation of the play is universal and can connect the feelings of people through different time periods. It's true that you can decontextualize, or you can recontextualize, or you can play the essence of the meaning even if it's not on the same instrument. I think that all these things are the acquired tastes. All this is to be knowledgeable while intuitive, sensitive while sensible, organizing thoughts while being free to open mind to other approaches. Ultimately, constructing your own approach. This is the respect for the student, not to be a clone or a copy of your own ideology, even if you think that's the only right compared to all of everybody else being wrong, because either the lineage from which you were taught, either the way you think others are all wrong. And perhaps it's good to swim against the tide, like somebody like Gould did, with conviction, but hard. or then you are in the tide, perhaps without conviction, and then I think it's lame. But perhaps it's satisfactory for those who produce and for those who listen. And then you can tell them, but there are other ways to discover the piece with more elements in it. There is more to it. You can choose to bring it more or less. You can choose to ignore it. You can perhaps ignore it because you haven't seen it, heard it, imagined it, not just copied it. It's a recreation of an existing piece in the case of an interpretation of somebody else's piece. But you never wondered if Mozart, Chopin did the right interpretation of their music. By essence, they expressed it the way they heard it inside themselves within the time period in which they lived. And when you extract that separately, and it's only the substance without the coating, then inevitably it becomes another, it takes another dimension. And I think ultimately we need to be able to do that and to accept that. But what makes me very sad is when uninformed audiences like performances that are not subtle, not played with the elements of the craftsmanship that can shape the phrase in a way that you hear an unforgettable soprano voice of this or this singer, and the timbre is unique to their voice, body extraction. Of course, the instrument is industrial. We cannot compare that with an individual projection of the inside of your own body as a singer, or gestural dance drawing in the space of a dancer who expresses so much of humanity through one gesture, of rising, of dropping, of hope, of despair. In harmonic language would be tension, release. In whichever way, breathing, exhaling, and then exhaling, and then organizing the breathing, the sentence one after the other, or one overlapping, or then one delaying with the suspension and the appoggiaturas, and all these affects which are part of the expression. I believe it is true to teach guidelines to framework the expression of a style within the genre of the piece and the instrument through which you express it for the purpose of the narrative storytelling or philosophical statement behind it, or the importance of the rest as part of the expression as well as the notes themselves, and how you organize the pulse within the rhythm, the phrasing within the polyphony if there is, not necessarily where is not, or how do you evoke a different genre from the one that you play, like singing or dancing, when you don't dance and you don't sing while you play, but you hint, just like the reader daydreams when they read a novel, or even when you watch the adaptation of it on screen, you can of course already being through the eye of the producer and the maker of the film, a little bit reducing your own imagination compared to reading the book for the character. Not we'll have a silent audience with open scores and we don't need a performer, so that you know or not the piece, that you know or not the subtleties of the language of the piece. I think the performer needs to bring to you the respect of the honesty of their service to the muse, and not necessarily only the effect of self-serving virtuosity for the sake of it. And that is something that existed in all times. Paganini, in his genius, was an entertainer compared to Schumann, who wasn't. And it doesn't belittle the one or make the other better. It's just that they bring different things through the fact that they even inspired Liszt and Brahms, for instance, and Rachmaninoff to write on on this incredible Paganini theme. So there was attraction, and there was perhaps rejection, and perhaps it was Bach considered himself a composer who wrote in the glory of God through his church job in relative poverty, and very little appreciation from his bosses. But he continued to do it for the beauty of it. He could have simplified it and make every week's cantata. That would be condescending. That would be probably, arrogant. But you don't want to treat your audience like that either, and neither did he. He wrote chorale preludes on the Luther songs in order to have the listener of the people coming to worship get immersed in the chorale, and then the cantata every week, enhanced in music, the text of the weekly mass. I mean, you can say, yes, it was functional music, and it was. And if it stays at that level, then what you put in it in terms of chromaticism, subtlety, polyphony, complexity, difficulty therefore to be put together and sang and played without rehearsal or much or any, copied by hand by his children and produced weekly almost industrially, but with no industrial means, there is no computer, anything of this kind. And the endless curiosity, imagination, flow of melodic lines and combined lines in polyphony makes that every Bach piece can be studied for so long to be discovered, like this millions and millions of billions, as they used to say in some of those shows, planets. You see them as dots from far away, and in fact they are worlds by their own. And I find that therefore very honest and humbling that Bach respected and God and his office and his job to do it at best and do more than what expected in subtlety and complexity, regardless if it was, unfortunately it wasn't, to the point to which he was forgotten, therefore after his death, that it was considered like important quality that he was bringing as an extra value to it. Today we would say, how come they mistreated him? But in fact, he was invisibilized. He was made invisible because there are so many craftsmen who did their job with more or less subtlety, more or less, and who perhaps were more successful the way they were marketed or marketing themselves. What's nothing changed today, except that I think we have access to aspects of performing of different people we can learn from or read articles about how they thought or for someone who wrote them. Of course, all that takes time. That's true. It's like for art, everything from sports, literature, entertainment, films. Once you like something, then you get curious to know more about it, just like love. When you discover a person you love, you're intrigued, you want to know more about this person. So same about an art form. And perhaps it's a niche and perhaps it's unnecessary, but it means to you. And then you bring to humanity all that meaning, all the life of a composer in each of their notes. That's what I like to believe. And as well as in each of their silences. That's why I believe in the importance to believe in humble, subtle, honest statements of music playing rather than self-serving ways. And if the self-serving ways replace the other way in the organizers, managers, and promoters of classical music in media or in general, then I still believe that that doesn't erase the importance of what you believe in. If in even if ultimately it appears to be not, let's say, appreciated, or perhaps because people who hear it don't know that they could appreciate it. They don't know they could have more touches and colors and voicings. Perhaps it's too much for them to receive that, but perhaps by giving it to them, you prepare them to become, therefore, a critical, informed listener, reader, tester of food, um, defining what is quality of thinking, of behaving in society, of quality of clothes, quality of how you love, quality of how you criticize, quality of how you are in this world between the unchosen moment you're born and the unchosen moment you will leave, and contribute through whatever you find to be or not your calling or just your acquired taste in cooking or in anything that brings you to share with others what is meaningful to you. And all this doesn't have to be stated like that, but I think in a Chopin or Rachmaninoff or Beethoven or Bartok or whoever performers, composers, note you play, there is a lot of their humanity in it. And I like to hope that even if we do horse racing with competitions, we do editions of music comparisons to the point to which we nag about little details between them, pretending that one is more original text than the other, because we don't always have that access. So much of the original texts were lost. To start with Bach, from student of generation to next, it can go into misunderstandings through miscopyings in order to learn it, willingly or not. And then ultimately what is left perhaps is not the detail, but it's the gesture, the meaning, and all of a sudden it touches people generations after. I think it's a miracle. And I'm very humbled that I can serve musicians, students, with all this of the humanity which I believe in. They can transmit either playing and teaching in turn.